Thank you, Victor. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cedric Mitchell, Deputy Director for Community Engagement. I want to welcome you all here today to this Land and Water Conservation Fund workshop. We are so excited to have you all here. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, these grants are to provide funding for the acquisition or development of land to create new outdoor recreation opportunities. The Land and Water Conservation Fund has helped to fund since 1965 over 1,000 parks throughout California. Either they have been created or improved through this particular grant. We're very excited about preparing for the next cycle of the applications that will fund this even more outdoor recreational opportunities for Californians. With over $30 million available in the next round, we're very excited to discuss this funding opportunity with you today. Even more so, we ask that you come with your creativity and innovation. We have had great projects with you in the past, and for many of you who have had projects with us, and we're very excited about introducing even greater projects to this national program. At this time, I'd like to allow the team who's going to be presenting to introduce themselves. So at this point, I'll stop and let Victor introduce himself and the rest of the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cedric. Good morning, everyone. I'm Victor Bertino, Program Manager for the application process. We look forward to helping you throughout the application process. I'd like to say that today just starts technical assistance, but our team will be available throughout the next months until June to help you. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Natalie B., and I'm the supervisor of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Harrison. I'm the Land and Water Conservation Fund Lead Project Officer, and I'm excited to be here.
Hey, everyone. I'm Christine Schilp. I'm a project officer here at OGALS. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. I'm Adela Valdez. I'm a competitive project officer. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
And good morning. My name is Nikki Lambert, and I am also a competitive project officer here at the Office of Grants and Local Services. And I would like to introduce the colleagues that are working behind the scenes to make sure everything runs smoothly for this workshop. First off, we have Supervisor Richard Rendon. Then we have Sam Cadeau, who is running our screen share, and he does a great job. And also we have Julie Jenkins, Julianne Coronado. Thank you so much, everyone. Welcome.
All right, well, thanks, team. And again, welcome everyone to our Land and Water workshop today. The focus today is geared towards applicants wishing to compete in the local agency competitive process. And we will cover a lot today, spending most of our time reviewing the program requirements in the application guide and the program timeline. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, I want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post a recording on the Land and Water Conservation Fund's webpage for future reference. I'd like to call attention to a few of the Microsoft Teams features to be aware of for the workshop today. The first is the chat feature. So Sam is circling where that chat feature is found on your screen right now. If this feature is very important because this is where you can ask questions throughout the webinar. For those of you that do not see this function on your screen, past participants have been able to access it by exiting and re-entering the workshop. We will be monitoring the chat feature and will answer your questions directly in the chat, as well as answer some questions out loud. If you see an icon next to your question, this is just our way of internally communicating with each other on who will be responding to your question. And so we'll be using the icons, the heart, the thumbs up and the smiley face, which looks like we're laughing, but we're not laughing at your questions. For, just keep that in mind. It's just our internal way of communicating with each other behind the scenes. And since we are using those icon features within our team, we ask that participants please refrain from using icons next to the comments in the chat. Even if you like the comment or the question or love the answer that was provided, if you can just refrain from using those icons as participants today. But feel free to use that chat and type in your questions throughout the whole session. If anyone has technical issues with your sound or video, please email ogals@parks.ca.gov. And we just entered that into the chat. Our team will be monitoring that email account to assist with any technical difficulties. You may also send a direct line phone number to that email and we can call you into the workshop. Closed captioning is also available for the workshop today. And the way that you get there is go to the 3 little dots where it says more, click on that and scroll down to language and speech and turn on live captions. Now we're going to take a look at the Land and Water webpage. This first page here, you can find it by going to www.parks.ca.gov/LWCF. Now, this first page provides general information about the program. And from this main page, you'll see various links. One of them is what we will spend the majority of our time today, the application process. But you'll also see there's a link to the grant administration webpage. This link provides information on the process to follow if the grant is awarded, such as the payment process, a sample contract, and so on. If you click the application process link, you'll first see the application deadline is June 1st, 2023. Followed by a link to Submittable. That's our online application portal. Next is a list of eligible applicants, and we will go into detail in a little bit on that. Now we're going to skip over this section for state agencies. It's not applicable for today's session. And so we'll scroll down to where you'll find the application guide. Sam, if you can scroll up just a tad. Thank you. The application guide is right there. And you'll use this guide for this application cycle due in June. As well as below this, there's other helpful links such as fillable forms and technical assistance documents. As you keep scrolling down, there is a link to post-selection federal requirements. We will touch at a high level on what this means. These are for applicants that have been recommended for funding, and we will walk you through the next step in this process to comply with the post-selection federal requirements. And just below that, you'll see a list of competitive review project officers. If you go ahead and click on the OGALS project officer, you'll see that we've assigned program officers by county. If you have any questions about any of our grant programs after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to the competitive review project officer, which are in the green column here on the page. They're very friendly and eager to help and answer any questions you have, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Next, we're going to review the agenda. Okay, well, we've already gone over our introductions and a basic workshop orientation. Next, I'm going to go over the timeline and point out the key milestones for this upcoming cycle. We will then jump into the application guide, go over the eligibility chart, the application packet and checklist, everything that you're going to need to submit come June 1st. We will also go over, those are the checklist items. There's 14 of them. Then we will go over the post-selection federal requirements and have a closure by Deputy Director Cedric Mitchell. Okay, thanks, Sam. If we can now switch over to the timeline. All right, well, right now we're participating in our last application webinar. The next timeline goal is the application deadline. Again, that's June 1st, 2023 before 5 p.m. That portal will close immediately at 5 p.m. So make sure to upload before that time. Over the summer, our office will be conducting our application reviews, and with the plan to announce by the end of this year, possibly late fall, but by the end of this year is our goal. For those applicants that have been selected to proceed, in early 2024, we will host a post-selection federal requirement workshop. And we will have an overview and actually go into details on how to comply with these requirements. So those include the historic evaluations required for Section 106, also completion of the National Park Services form, the application and revision, we call it an A&R form, and that includes NEPA analysis. We also will go over the details of how to prepare your Land and Water Conservation Fund boundary map. And if you're familiar with this program, it used to be a requirement at the time of application, but now we've bumped it back to only those that will be selected for funding. And then finally, for acquisition projects, these will need to have a UASFLA appraisal, or also known as Yellow Book, with an independent review of that appraisal. It can take applicants roughly 6 to 12 months to complete the post-election federal requirements, but we have a team of specialists and experts that will help you along the way. So when you see this timeline, don't fret. I know it seems like a lot, but we will definitely help you along the way and help your project move along as fast as possible. For the projects that come to us first, so as soon as an application meets those post-selection federal requirements, we will send it over to National Park Service on a first come, first served basis. So as the funding becomes available, you'll see here we have 2 opportunities. We're getting ahead of federal fiscal year 24 and 25. So your project approval date will depend on how fast we can help you through those federal requirements and then get it over to National Park Service for their funding approval. With that, your approximate start date will probably be in late 2024. That means the start date as far as when you can get your shovels in the ground or you can acquire the property. For those applicants that may need a little extra time to get through those post-selection requirements, we'll also have a later start date available for those applicants. And then the grant performance period, that starts on the date of federal approval. So once we obtain that funding certificate from National Park Service, that marks your start date. So everyone will have a unique start date because, again, we're sending them over on a flow basis. From that point, you will have up to 3 years to complete your project. We'll go a little bit more in detail during this session today on pre-award project planning costs. But basically what that means is costs such as designs, plans, and all your environmental analysis, if those are incurred up to 3 years before that expected National Park Service's approval date, you can actually include that for reimbursement in this grant. And we'll go into more details on that shortly. We will revisit this timeline and the end to just kind of recap and summarize it once again at the end of our webinar today. With that, I am now going to turn it over to Megan, and she's going to start us off in the application guide and give us an overview of the program's eligibility and funding. And I will now turn it to Megan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Well, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you today is to use the guide to prepare your application. So we'll be going over key sections today, and we want to dive straight into the meat and potatoes of this guide. So we're going to go straight to page 7, which includes information on eligible applicants. And this page mentions both the local agency applicants and state agency applicants, but we're going to be focusing on the local agency competitive program today as that application deadline comes first. As you can see here at the top of the page, local agency eligible applicants are cities and counties, federally recognized Native American tribes, joint powers authorities where all members are public agencies, and recreation and park districts and special districts with authority to acquire, operate, and maintain public park and recreation areas. This guide is also used by the eligible state agency applicants that receive Land and Water Conservation Fund funding based on percentages established through Public Resources Code 5099.12. So we're going to have a separate workshop for these state agencies, and today, as I mentioned, we're focusing on the local agency process. Now, page 8 includes some more detailed information on how funding is allocated and reallocated, and we encourage anyone who wants to learn more about this process to revisit page 8 after the webinar, but together we'll go on to page 9. And there's $30 million available in this round of competitive funding, utilizing the anticipated federal fiscal year 24 and federal fiscal year 25 apportionments for California. There's no minimum grant request amount, and the maximum grant request amount is $6 million. A match of no less than 50% of the total project cost is required. For example, a $10 million project may request up to $5 million in grant funding. And page 34, which we'll review later today, discusses eligible match sources, but in general, most federal sources are not eligible as match, while state, local, and private sources, including donations and volunteer work, are eligible. Awarded projects are provided grant funding through a reimbursement-only process, and we'll talk about this throughout the webinar, but this means that applicants must have the total project cost funding available upfront and submit reimbursement requests for expenditures. Now, the rate of reimbursement is the percentage of the land and water grant amount in relation to the total project cost. For example, a $10 million project with a $5 million grant amount would have a 50% reimbursement rate. National Park Service will reimburse 50% of the total eligible expenditures submitted with each payment request until the full grant amount is reimbursed. However, a project with a $4 million total project cost and a $1 million grant amount would have a 25% reimbursement rate. It's also important to understand that this means if any project finishes under budget, the grantee would not be reimbursed for that full grant amount. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now I'll hand it over to Christine.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Megan. Okay, so at the bottom of page 9 is an introduction to eligible projects. Eligible projects are acquisition projects that result in a new recreation opportunity for the public within 3 years. As we navigate through the scoring criteria, you will notice that acquiring property to create outdoor recreation opportunities for the public are prioritized for this program. Development projects are also eligible. Please note that for development projects, applicants must own the project site land in fee simple. In order to be eligible, all acquisition or development projects must also meet at least one statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, which is shortened to SCORP, priority. We will discuss SCORP further when we get to checklist item number 4, which is the project summary. Note that combination projects involving both acquisition and development are not eligible for this program. Let's turn to page 10 to look at examples of eligible acquisition projects. Through the LWCF program, eligible acquisition projects include purchasing property to create a new park, expanding a park, and creating a buffer or view shed for an existing park. Acquisitions must result in a new recreation opportunity for the public within 3 years after the completion of the acquisition. Since combination projects are not eligible, this means that applicants must propose to either 1, have a plan in place, including an expected funding source to develop the land within 3 years after acquisition, or 2, acquire land that already has a recreation feature on the property that will immediately provide a recreational opportunity, such as land with trails or a walkable fire road, or land which will serve as a buffer or view shed for an existing park. Spoiler alert, when we get to the project selection criteria, you'll see how land that already has a recreation feature ready for the public's use will gain more points. Reach out to your assigned competitive project officer if you have any specific questions on the eligibility of a proposed acquisition. Let's now turn to page 11 to look at examples of eligible development projects. For this program, development must be for outdoor recreation. Indoor recreation structures such as community centers are not eligible. Examples of eligible projects include constructing new athletic fields and courts, gardens, dog parks, open spaces, outdoor fitness equipment, playgrounds, trails, and more. Applicants are in no way limited to the items included on this page, as long as proposed features are for outdoor recreation. Renovation of outdoor recreation items and construction of major support amenities such as parking lots and restrooms are also eligible. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Adela.
Thank you, Christine. We are now on to page 12. Since we are going to discuss the SCORP priorities when we review the project summary section, let's skip down to the application process and timeline on pages 12 through 14. As previously stated, local agency applications for this round are due June 1st, 2023 before 5 p.m. Applications must be submitted online through Submittable. Applications submitted by mail and/or requests to submit applications after the deadline will not be accepted. In the months leading to the deadline, we encourage all applicants to read the eligibility card on page 16, which we will review together, as well as the grant administration guide, post-completion park stewardship requirements, and the post-selection federal requirements on our website. We'll also discuss the federal requirements briefly toward the end of our webinar today. OGLAUs will review applications for approximately 6 months. Moving on to the top of page 13. As a reminder, selected applicants will be notified by OGALs and will go through the post-selection federal requirements. Once the federal requirements are complete, OGALs will submit the final federal package to NPS for review and approval. The LWCF award is only made after NPS reviews and approves the LWCF application. Once NPS awards the project, OGALs will then draft and issue a contract to the awardee. And once signed by both parties, the applicant officially becomes a grantee and can begin requesting reimbursements. Now let's turn to page 14. There are many layers to the LWCF program. Most of the unpredictable timing is dependent on the time it takes for applicants to complete the federal requirements and how quickly applications can receive approval once in NPS's hands. Here on page 14 is a general time frame. However, since the timeline Natalie shared at the start of this workshop provided specific dates for this round, we'll skip to the middle section and bring your attention to one key point we did not yet cover. Under post-selection federal requirements, please be aware that once an LWCF application is submitted, the site is subject to National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and Section 106 approval, and cannot have any activities in the project site footprint until these federal requirements are complete. This includes work associated with project implementation or another scope of work from other funding that overlaps with the LWCF project site, such as grading, demolition, construction, landscaping, etc. Demolition, renovation, or other work like soil remediation taking place in the project footprint must be complete prior to the application deadline in June or wait until Section 106 is complete. Otherwise, the project may be rejected from consideration. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here is Nikki.
Thank you, Adela. So I'm going to talk about grant performance period and the eligibility card. On page 15, you'll see this covers basic information regarding the grant performance period. The grant performance period begins on the official National Park Service, or NPS, approval date. Both acquisition and development projects will have up to 3 years from the start of the grant performance period to complete the project. Eligible planning costs may be incurred up to 3 years before the application is approved by NPS. We will go over eligible pre-award planning costs, such as preparation of environmental documents and Section 106. That'll be towards the end of the webinar. Reimbursement requests can be submitted to the Office of Grants and Local Services, or OGALS, after NPS approves the project and the state and local contract is executed. Please note that submitting an application does not guarantee funding, nor does recommendation for funding by OGALS. Funding is not guaranteed until NPS has approved the project and obligated the funding for it. Moving over to page 16, applicants will find the application eligibility card. This card is designed to ensure that applicants are aware of all eligibility requirements for this program. If any of the answers are no, it is not an eligible land and water project. So we're going to go over some of these questions here, and we're going to talk about these key points here. Number 1, the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Program, or SCORP, priorities can be found on the Land and Water Conservation Fund webpage, as well as on the Parks for California website. Again, we'll go over this shortly as we cover the project summary. Number 2, will the applicant become the landowner through the acquisition? Or for development projects, does the applicant own the land at time of application? 3, does the applicant understand that the entire park will be placed under Land and Water Conservation Fund protection and must be preserved for outdoor recreation in perpetuity or forever? 4, can all required documents and responses be submitted by the deadline? And additionally here, can the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, analysis be completed by the time of application or no later than 60 days after the application deadline? 5, does the applicant understand that they must cash flow the entire project, as LWCF is a reimbursement-only program? And 6, will the project be completed within 3 years once approved? Finally, we have 7. Does the applicant understand that no work can occur within the project footprint from application submittal until final NPS approval? So again, if any applicant answers no to any of these questions that we just went over, the project is ineligible. We recommend regrouping to make the necessary adjustments if you do have no's, or to propose a different project that can actually meet these requirements. Please use that chat as you have been doing for any questions, and I am going to send this over to Christine.
Nikki, real quick here, we are getting some questions about the basically the match, and so let's look at item 5 on your screen here on the same page. Sam, you can stay here. We're getting some questions about how match and the rate of reimbursement works for this federal program. So the key here is you have to be prepared to cash flow 100% of the total project cost. And that's really important to understand because this federal program is a reimbursement only program. This program does not allow advance payments. Okay. So how you establish your total project cost at the time of application is really important to ensure you get your full grant amount reimbursed. And so we had a great question of how do I ensure I get my full grant amount reimbursed. And so let's say at the time of application you establish your estimated total project cost at $6 million. You have to incur $6 million to be reimbursed the full grant amount. The Land and Water grant amount can fund up to half of your total project cost. So using the $6 million total project cost example, you can request up to $3 million. Now, of course, if you already have, let's say, $5 million of committed funds and you only need $1 million more for your $6 million total project, your Land and Water grant request would be $1 million for your $6 million total project cost. If the grant's awarded, to get your final $1 million reimbursed, you have to incur $6 million of total project costs. So again, it starts off with what is your estimated total project cost at the time of application. That's your baseline. And if a grant's awarded, you have to incur those full costs because at least 50% will be matched. Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Vic. Okay, so now we're going to turn to page 17. And this is the application packet and checklist. As previously mentioned, applications will be submitted through the online submittable platform. The local agency competitive column shows that checklist items 1 and 2 and 4 through 10 are required for all local agency applicants. And then either items 11 or 12 or items 13 and 14 are also required based on the type of project proposed, whether there will be an acquisition or a development project. If a checklist item is pending, provide a placeholder stating what the next steps are for completion and include an estimated date the item will be complete and submitted to OGALS. Checklist item number 5 cannot include a placeholder. All project selection criteria must be submitted by that June 1st application deadline. Please note the second to last bullet at the top of the page. Only send requested checklist items. Do not send supplemental items such as letters of support addressed to our department. We understand the work that it takes to get those letters, but instead, please focus on planning the project. All projects are reviewed based on the merits of the project using the project selection criteria only. Okay, so page 18 has a brief introduction to the application form, but let's turn to page 19 so we can look at the form itself, which is checklist item number 1. On the screen here is a fillable version that is also available on our website. Here you can see that there are fillable boxes for information regarding the project and the applicant. The maximum grant request amount can be up to half of the total project cost, up to $6 million. For applicants that wish to include a grant request range, list a minimum grant request amount if willing to accept less than the maximum amount stated. For example, if a total project cost is $10 million, the applicant may ask for up to $5 million, but can also indicate willingness to accept $4 million and can reflect that amount under the minimum grant request, showing that's the lowest amount the applicant could take. Applicants that choose to include a range must be able to complete the full project scope regardless of how much grant funding is ultimately awarded. Using the example just given, if OGALS awarded the minimum grant amount of $4 million, the agency must still complete the $10 million scope. The authorized representative will sign this form and is considered the approver for the application. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Christine. Page 20 provides information on checklist item number 2, which is the authorizing resolution. And the authorizing resolution shows that the governing body approves of submitting the application and provides a point position to review and approve the application documents. Please do not change the language. However, an applicant can reformat the resolution if needed. The next page, page 21, includes that language, and so we'll go and take a look. And on here, I want to point out provision 6. Note that the position title is what's required here, not a person's name. This position will also be responsible for signing payment requests if awarded. So if a specific person is identified and that person, say, moves to a new position, additional paperwork will be required to designate a new authorized representative. And this is why designating a position title that can just stay the same rather than a person is important for this form. And then pages 22 through 23 cover the certification letter for state agencies, which is not applicable to the local agency competitive program. So we're going to jump straight over to page 24 to take a look at the project summary checklist item number 4. So the project summary is not scored. However, responses help determine eligibility for the Land and Water Program, and responses will be entered directly into Submittable. This checklist item has 2 parts, as you can see on the screen. The first identifies the project scope through a brief summary of up to 500 words. All recreation features and major support amenities proposed for this project should be included in the summary. This is the project summary information that OGALS will use to determine the scope of the proposed project. And for the second part, applicants will identify the applicable SCORP priorities for this project and provide a brief description of how the project will meet that priority or priorities. The 2021 to 2025 SCORP establishes the current priorities. And we've been talking about SCORP a lot. We're finally going to dive in and show you what these priorities look like. So in order to be eligible, projects must meet at least one, and we'll go to the website to show you how to find them. So on that main application process website, if you scroll down to the application resources section, down there, and the third bullet point that Sam is highlighting with his cursor, local agency competitive program SCORP priorities, is the link you can click to just go straight to the SCORP priorities for this program. And so as you can see on the page, there's 5 different priorities, and there's some sub bullets about what these priorities look like. And then at the bottom of the page, you can see there's a link to the full SCORP report. So we wanted to put the priorities here to make it easier to access, but we do encourage all applicants to review that report to learn more about outdoor recreation priorities in California. And we encourage everyone to take a look at these priorities. As I've said a couple times, eligible applications must meet at least one. Many applicants will just naturally meet more than one, but if you don't meet all of them, don't fret, that's not a problem. As long as you meet one, the project is eligible. So we'll head back into the application guide, and I'll hand it over to Adela to get us started on the selection criteria.
Thank you, Megan. Let's move to page 25, which is the start of checklist item number 5, project selection criteria. There are 8 project selection criteria. 7 of these criteria are scored for a total of 100 possible points. Points are gained in the scoring process, and everyone starts with 0. Included with the guidance for each criteria are scoring rubrics to show applicants exactly what must be done to gain maximum points. We recommend using the criteria and accompanying rubrics to conceptualize a project that scores as many points as possible. Projects that do so are more likely to be competitive. Project selection criteria number 1, unmet need, begins on page 26. Applicants will answer either A and B if applying for an acquisition project, or C and D if applying for a development project. At the top of the page, note that a high priority project will address more than one of the SCORP priorities and will address an urgent unmet need compared to other statewide applications. For acquisitions, A and B request information on why the acquisition is a high priority, both based on the availability of the land and the need for park space within the community being served. As you can see, the scoring rubric will award the most points to high priority acquisitions compared to other statewide applications submitted for this round of funding. For development projects, questions C and D request information on why this project is a high priority for the community that will be served, and what effect a failure to fund the project would have on residents. The scoring rubric is on page 27. So we will go to 27 right now. And it shows that the most points would be awarded to a high priority development project compared to other statewide applications submitted for this round of funding. Project selection criteria number 2, type of project, is also on page 27. For this criteria, applicants will identify which type of project they are applying for. Acquisitions to create a new park will receive 10 points. Development projects that create a new park will receive 8 points. Acquisitions to expand an existing park will receive 6 points. And development projects that improve an existing park will receive 4 points. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here is Nikki.
Thank you, Adela. So I'm going to talk about project selection criteria 3 and 4. And project selection criteria number 3 is for new acreage placed under Land and Water Conservation Fund or LWCF protection. And this one begins on page 28. As part of the Land and Water program, parks that are funded must place the entire park boundary acreage under LWCF protection. This means the land must remain a park for outdoor recreation use in perpetuity or forever. Only acreage not currently under LWCF protection counts for this criteria. The rubric shows if the proposed project will place a new acreage under LWCF protection, 10 points will be received. And you can see the rubric right there. However, if a park is already under LWCF protection from a previous LWCF grant, the project is considered a high priority based on criteria 1, and 5 points will be received. If the entire park is already under LWCF protection from a previous LWCF grant and will not be considered a high priority project per the response to criteria 1, 0 points will be received. Now, at the bottom of this page, you'll see that up to 5 additional points will be given to those parks placing the most acres under new LWCF protection compared to all statewide applications received. Next up, we have project selection criteria number 4, which is park deficient or economically disadvantaged area, and that is found on page 29. This criteria uses both the park access and community fact finder tools to provide data on park deficient and or economically disadvantaged areas. The community fact finder report will analyze the half-mile radius around the park to show whether the project meets 1A, a new park in an area where no other parks exist, or 1B, a median household income that is less than $67,278. Now, the park access tool report will show whether the project meets 2A, more than the state average of 21% of residents living further than a half mile from the park, or 2B, more than 61% of residents living in areas with less than 3 acres of parkland per 1,000 people. The LWCF webpage also has the current numbers that will be used for the purposes of this application if applicants ever need to refer back to them later. Now, applicants will enter in the numbers for both reports in the application, and they will also upload both reports, even if the goals identified for this criteria are not met in the report. And just to note, on page 38, there are some additional instructions on uploading these reports as checklist item number 10, as you can see right there. And we will go over these steps together next with Natalie.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks, Nikki. Okay, so checklist item number 10 is the Community Fact Finder report and Park Access Tool report with the instructions here on your page. First, we'll look at the Community Fact Finder report instructions. There is a link for you here, parksforcalifornia.org/communities. So Sam's going to go ahead and click on that for us. And for the purposes of our example today, we're going to enter in the address here, Capitol Park, Sacramento. Go ahead and click on the search button. And you'll see this brings us to Capitol Park right behind our state capitol. There is a blue pin in the middle of the park, and applicants have the ability to move the pin anywhere within the park's boundary, but not outside the park. As you can see, the data changes as you move the pin around. After you choose a place for the pin within the park boundary, you'll select Get Report. And we're going to bring up what the report looks like right now. All right, thank you. Applicants will pull numbers from this report for your response to project selection criteria number 4 that Nikki just went over. As you'll see on this example, the parks per 1,000 residents is 7.33, and it's highlighted for you here. which would be the number entered into submittable. Note that the goal for criteria number 4, 1A, was to not have any parks within the half-mile radius. So since this example, you'll see here that we have 7.33 acres of park space per 1,000 residents within the half-mile radius. There would be no points awarded for this criteria for 1A. It would not meet that threshold of 0 parks. However, for 1B in criteria 4, the median household income here you'll see is $49,502, which is less than that threshold of $67,278. So this report would meet goal 1B. Upload your report into submittable for checklist item number 10, as Nikki advised. And the statistics again here on this report must be the same as those entered for project selection criteria number 4 in submittable. Only one fact finder report will be accepted per application. Now we're going to go back to our instructions for checklist item 10 here on page 38 and go over the park access tool instructions. Now the address here is the www.parksforcalifornia.org. This time it's /park access. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And for the purposes of today, we're going to go ahead and select the city of Sacramento. Applicants can choose whether they want to select the city of their project or the county. So it's up to you to decide which one you would like to submit or put in here for your report to be generated. And then we're going to select Get Report, which is being circled here. And now we'll bring up what that report looks like. As with the Community Fact Finder, applicants will pull the numbers from this report for project selection criteria 4. For 2A under criteria 4, you'll see here that 8% is the percentage of residents living further than a half-mile radius. This is less than the state average, which is found down at the bottom. It's being circled right now. The state average is 21% of residents live further than a half-mile from a park. So in this example, no points will be received for 2A. For 2B, 37% of residents live in areas with less than 3 acres of park space per 1,000 residents, which is also less than the state average you'll see here at the bottom, 61%. Note that although neither response for goal 2 will qualify for points, both of these numbers must be included in the submittable application, and this report must be uploaded under checklist item number 10. As mentioned earlier, the statistics shown on the report must be the same as those entered for project selection criteria number 4. And again, only one park access tool report will be accepted per application. Now let's return to the bottom of page 29 in the application guide and review the scoring rubric. For the sample reports that we just pulled, one goal, remember it was that median household income, one goal was met through the 2 reports. So this project example would have scored 10 points for meeting one of the priorities. If the median household income had been above the threshold of $67,278, then none of the 4 goals would have been met, and the project would have scored 0 points because none of the priorities were met. Please know though, if your reports combined, if you have 2 or more goals that are met between the 2 reports, the project will receive 15 points. Again, it's important to upload both reports, one community fact finder report and one park access tool report with your application. Okay, and I will now turn it over to Christine and she will take us through the next project selection criteria. Oh, we have Victor has a hand up. Go ahead, Vic.
Thank you, Natalie. Thanks. So for the criteria that Natalie just covered, we did get some questions about where do I get this data, or questions for the link. And so the links are on the Land and Water application webpage. If you could please refer to my response to Diane at 10:24 a.m. in chat. That provides all the thresholds that Natalie covered, as well as the links to the web-based tools that you will use for your report. And I just copied and pasted straight from the application, Land and Water application webpage. Okay. Thank you very much. Also, we'll take a break in about 10 more minutes at 10:40. And after break, we'll take a 15-minute break. After the break, I'll do a recap of the bulk of questions that were asked so far this morning. Great job, participants, asking questions so far. You're definitely keeping us on our toes, so we appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks, Natalie. Christine.
Thanks so much, Vic. Okay, so we are going to go to project selection criteria 5, which is population served on page 30. This criteria focuses on the benefits the project will provide to older adults, at-risk youth, and/or persons with disabilities. Think about recreation features that can be incorporated into the park for each user group and ask for their input. Applicants will provide brief responses for how the project will benefit each group. These responses should include information on how the project design will meet the needs of these groups. It should be a qualitative description rather than a quantitative information. 15 points will be received if older adults, at-risk youth, and persons with disabilities will all clearly benefit from this project. If none of these underserved population groups will benefit or no information was provided, 0 points will be received. So also on this page at the bottom there is project selection criteria number 6, which is public input. Criteria 6 asks applicants to describe the public input process for this park project within 5 years leading up to the application deadline. To qualify for full points, the public input process must have occurred within the last 5 years, and it must be clear that public input was gathered specific to this project. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions about these 2 criteria. And now I will send it over to Adela.
Thank you, Christine. Project selection criteria number 7, project readiness, is on page 31. Applicants with acquisition projects will fill out a chart in Submittable and provide either a completion date for both the Yellow Book appraisal and purchase agreement or an estimated completion date. Note that 5 points will be received for each item completed before the application due date. 5 more points will be awarded to acquisitions that are ready for recreation immediately upon the close of escrow. Acquisitions that have the appraisal and agreement ready and do not require development will score up to 15 points. This does not mean that additional improvements can't be planned for the site. However, projects that have at least one feature available, such as a fire road that can be used as a trail, or projects that will provide a buffer to a current park, will receive these additional 5 points. Applicants with development projects will fill out a chart in Submittable and provide either a date completed for each item or an estimated completion date. 2 points will be received for each completed item for a maximum of 10 points. We understand that often applicants do not have permits or bid packages prepared at this stage. Don't let that sway you from applying for this program. Project selection criteria number 8, applicant eligibility, is on page 32. This criteria is not scored. However, answers will affect project eligibility. Applicants should answer either A or B. Those who have administered a grant with OGALS within the last 15 years should respond to A. Applicants who have not administered a grant with OGALS before should respond to B to describe any previous funding experience. Applicants who have not ever administered a grant before, who have a record of failing to comply with grant provisions, or who have an unresolved conversion will not be eligible for this program. Project selection criteria number 8 marks the end of checklist number 5. As a reminder, all of the project selection criteria responses must be submitted by the deadline of June 1st. No additional information or responses will be accepted after the deadline for these criteria. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions, and I see that Victor has his hand up.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Adela and team. So I'm going to answer a few questions about the criteria, and then we'll take a 15-minute break. So Bridget had a great question, and the question is about the likelihood that National Park Service would approve the proposed project if your application is selected through the state competition. And I'd like to say, Bridget, that over the past 22 years, that our Deputy Director, Cedric Mitchell, has been with us, and some of us have been here as long as he has, for 22 years. National Park Service has approved 100% or very close to 100% of all projects proposed in National Park Service. Sometimes it depends on, timing, of course, of when the post-selection federal requirements are complete if your application is selected. And so, of course, if we select your application through the state competition, our team will be ready to assist you with, Section 106 Cultural Historic and the NEPA pathway based on your CEQA documents, and we'll cover that briefly later in this workshop. But as long as you can meet those federal requirements, the application will then be considered actionable by National Park Service. And we always make sure that your projects are eligible based on the scope and based on the priorities of the program. So we'll work with National Park Service to help ensure your project is approved if it's selected through our process. So this is different than what's called the ORLIP Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which does involve both the state layer of competition and then a federal national competition. Land and Water, this process we're talking about today, is a state competition only. So great question. And then we had another question about is the criteria that the team just covered, criteria 1 through 8, based on the competition? And I'd say yes and no. There are some criteria, like criteria number 1, which is on page 26 through 27. And part of criteria number 3 on the bottom of page 28, that is based on the state competition. But if you look at the scoring rubrics at the bottom of each of the criteria that the team just covered, it tells you some of the criteria that's entirely within your control. That is, for example, on the bottom of page 27, type of project, you'll see that if you're proposing acquisition to create a new park, that will score a certain amount of points. Or if you look at the fact finder and the park access tool data that Natalie presented on page 29, it shows you how you'll rank if you meet some of those criteria. So my best piece of advice here before break to think about is you want to use the criteria to help steer you towards conceptualizing a project, finding a project location and project scope that will help maximize the points within your control. Okay, so we had a question during yesterday's workshop about the criteria for the community fact finder report and the park access tool report. And let's just say that for some reason, the project site does not meet any of the priorities. So you'll see in the bottom of the screen that Sam is showing, let's say it does not meet any of the priorities. So you can tell that in that case, out of the 100-point system, your application would start off at 85 points. It can get no higher than 85 points. So that's within, this is something that you already know going into the process. If that's your situation, what we would encourage, we would still welcome your application, obviously, as long as it's eligible, because you may max out everywhere else and 85 could be competitive. We don't know yet, but one thing I would encourage you to do is if let's say your project site would meet none of the priorities, it doesn't meet 1A or B or 2A or B, we would encourage you to look throughout your jurisdiction for another potential project site. And there's some powerful examples in the past through this system where applicants did make a shift and found a terrific site, and were awarded the grants. And so I would encourage you to allow the criteria to steer you to score as many points as possible. Okay. All right, great. So let's take a 15-minute break, everyone, and we'll do a quick recap of this morning's questions so far, and then we'll continue with the guidelines. So thank you so much. Okay, welcome back from break, everyone. Okay, so let's do a quick recap here of some of the bulk of questions. Um, so I'll briefly cover about five themes that came up this morning so far. So we got quite a bit of questions about the match requirement and rate of reimbursement based on the total project cost. So in addition to what's in the application guide itself, I just posted at 10:55 a link from our application website page, which covers the second bullet point, covers the rates of reimbursement, match, and grant request range guidance. So please go to the Land and Water application webpage and read that link to get examples of how the match requirement works based on the total project cost and your grant request amount. The other questions we received were about eligible types of projects. And the key thing to remember is that this program is for outdoor public recreation. So you want the majority of your project cost to be for creating new outdoor recreation opportunities to be competitive. So there's a difference between just being eligible and being competitive. And so the guidance is, if you're thinking about only applying for a restroom building, while we do recognize that restroom buildings are important and eligible, we would encourage you to also include the creation of new recreation opportunities as the bulk of your project. So you can include park restrooms, a parking lot, maybe a access road within the park boundary to the parking lot, for example. But again, the majority of your project should be to create new recreation opportunities. Okay, and the other really important question we received was about the perpetuity requirement, basically meaning if the grant is awarded, does the entire park have to be available to the public for outdoor recreation use forever? And the answer is yes, which is a good thing if your goal is to keep and preserve the park as a park for the public's benefit for future generations. So I would describe this as a strength of the program if you would look for additional federal protection over your park for your legacy and for the benefit of future generations. Okay, as Natalie will cover probably in about 30 minutes or so, if the grant is awarded, we'll work with you on developing the boundary map that will be approved by National Park Service so that there's a record of the park boundary that has to remain as a park for public use in perpetuity. And let's see here. We received some questions about the project selection criteria. Again, the key point here is to use the project selection criteria section as a guide now to help plan both a competitive project site and project scope. And the point rubrics in the project selection criteria section are there to help provide additional guidance for you of how to be competitive. And that section starts on page 25. Now, if there's any questions as you start planning and using the guidelines, our team will be available to help you throughout the process. So again, the assistance does not end today. Your ability to ask questions will continue all the way through June until you apply. And this is a state competition process only. So if your application is selected for funding, we will then work closely with you to secure the federal funding. It's in our mutual interest as partners to make sure all funds made available to California stay in California. So we work really closely and hard with you to help assist you to secure those funds. And finally, you may have some questions about timing. Natalie will cover the timeline for this program for this round at the end of today's webinar. So roughly around 11, I'd say maybe 11:45 or so. In about 45 minutes, we'll cover the timeline and next steps in great detail. All right. Thank you so much, team. You're up.
Thank you, Victor. All right, we're going to dive into checklist item number 6, the detailed budget narrative. And this is on page 33 of the guide. We are really excited about this because the detailed budget narrative combines several previously separate funding forms into one, and that includes the previous grant scope cost estimate form, funding sources form, and pre-award planning cost form. Now, all of that information is on one form. So a fillable worksheet is available on our website, and we'll go over it now, and we'll actually go to the website to show you how to find it first. So on our main application process website, if you scroll down to fillable application forms, you'll see that it is number 4 in that list. So go ahead and click on the budget narrative and it'll download a copy. And now we'll go over that copy. So as you can see on the screen, there's 3 tabs, and we're starting with the instructions tab. And each column on the form has its own separate detailed instructions so that all applicants have this information at their fingertips. And if you scroll down a little bit on the instructions tab, you'll see that there's also instructions for the funding sources tab further down. So if we go over to that detailed budget narrative tab, at the top, you'll see we're requesting the project name, the grant amount requested, a brief project scope, and then the rest of this tab breaks down the costs into separate categories and to the level of detail that National Park Service requires. So each scope item and project cost should be itemized separately in the applicable category, and we want to see the estimated number of units included. So for example, if installing fencing is part of a development project, write fencing into column A, and then add the unit of measure and number of units and the cost per unit into those subsequent columns. I want to draw your attention to column E, the pre-award planning cost column. Pre-award planning costs must be identified with an X in this column. So this includes design, CEQA, NEPA, and Section 106. And we highly recommend applicants include at least Section 106 costs as a pre-award planning expense because this process can be costly. Pre-award planning costs are eligible for reimbursement if incurred within 3 years prior to National Park Service project approval, as we've said previously. So please just be cognizant of that 3-year window. And in order to be eligible for reimbursement, pre-award planning costs must be identified in this column. Now, column G includes milestone completion dates. So for pre-award planning costs, that would be the date that it was completed. And for your other items, that would be the estimated future completion dates. All costs listed on this form must be eligible land and water costs, as the grant plus match amount equals the total project cost. So all elements that make up that total project cost must be eligible under the program. And as the project cost and grant amount are entered, the bottom of the form populates the anticipated rate of reimbursement, which cannot exceed 50%. And which is the anticipated rate at which projects will be reimbursed if awarded. So Sam was showing it right down there, and that'll just help populate as you go through and add in project costs. Now we'll jump over to the final tab, which is the funding sources tab. And this requests the name of the funding source, amount or value, type, and date secured. All funding sources must be secured by the application deadline. and the total project cost on this tab should match the total project cost on the detailed budget narrative tab and also be consistent throughout the rest of the application. As a reminder, Land and Water is a reimbursement-only program, so applicants must identify sources to cash flow the entire project up front. That's both the grant and the match. Please do not list Land and Water Conservation Fund as a funding source on this form. Grantees will pay for expenses up front and then submit reimbursement requests along the way to be reimbursed at that rate of reimbursement. Now, please use the chat feature if you have any questions, and I'll hand it over to Nikki to discuss match and eligible and ineligible costs.
Great, thank you so much, Megan. So we're going to return to the guide to review eligible match in further detail. It is important for all applicants to understand that federal funds are not eligible to be used for Land and Water Conservation Fund match, except a federal grant program that has statutory language included that specifically allows it to be used as match for LWCF, such as Community Development Block Grants or CDBG, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021 Recreational Trail Program funds. If an applicant's project has federal funding involved and an applicant is not sure if it is eligible, please reach out to the assigned competitive project officer for the applicant's county to discuss it further. Most of the time, if other federal funding is involved, the project will not be eligible for LWCF. State, local, and private sources are eligible, and this page here includes some examples. For acquisition projects, donated land for match must be donated within the project performance period and also meet the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, or UASFLA. It's also known as Yellow Book standards, and that's to determine the value of the donation. Funding required by law is not eligible for match, and funding contributions with restrictions to how the site can be used may impact eligibility as well. And an example of that is a conservation easement. And that could be an issue. It's just going to depend on the phrasing. If an applicant does have any questions, please reach out to the assigned competitive project officer to discuss. Now, looking over on page 35, you'll see this includes more detailed information on how to calculate the value of donations used as match. We recommend applicants review this page in more detail and reach out with any questions. For this webinar, we're going to skip over this page and we're going to jump right over to the eligible and ineligible cost section. So eligible costs, which is found on page 47, as you can see here, this shows examples of eligible acquisition costs. And this includes the cost of the land itself, relocation costs, employee services, and grant administration. Now I want you to note on that left-hand column, incidental costs involved in acquisition, such as title reports, appraisal fees, and etc., are not eligible. On pages 48 and 49, those cover eligible development costs. Pre-award planning costs are eligible and are not limited to a specific percentage of the grant. Eligible pre-award costs can include public meetings, planning documents, permits, CEQA and NEPA, Section 106, employee services, and project administration. But please note here under project administration that this does not include grant writing. That is ineligible. Remember that to be eligible for reimbursement, these pre-award costs must be included and marked in that pre-award column on the detailed budget narrative that Megan went over. Again, these must be incurred no earlier than 3 years from the expected NPS approval. Eligible construction cost examples, as seen here, those include site prep and grading, materials and equipment, construction management, employee services, and project grant administration. So all of these construction costs must be incurred after NPS approval. Groundbreaking before receiving NPS approval will jeopardize the grant funding. Ineligible cost, found on page 50, includes examples such as costs incurred outside the grant performance period, overhead business expenses such as utilities, mortgage, or rent, costs for work outside the park site boundaries, fundraising, food, grant writing, as I mentioned earlier, programming costs, any operation and maintenance costs, and any other items not related directly to the grant program or grant project. Now we're going to note here, and if you're taking notes, really important, that public art, security cameras, sound systems, televisions, video equipment, and electric vehicle charging stations are ineligible. These are actually common items that we do see in LWCF applications and that they must be removed due to their ineligibility. Please keep in mind that if costs are ineligible for reimbursement, they are also ineligible as match. Match can only include items that are eligible for the LWCF program. Please use that chat feature if you have any questions, and I'm going to pass it back to Natalie.
Thank you, Nikki. Now we will cover checklist item number 7, CEQA compliance on page 36. Applicants should plan to have CEQA complete either by the application deadline or no later than the end of July 2023. CEQA analysis must cover the project site-specific grant scope. For acquisition projects, the environmental review needs to include the assessor parcel numbers to be acquired. Typically, we see notice of exemptions as the appropriate document for acquisition projects, generally because you're just transferring the land. There's no ground disturbance. So that's the typical CEQA document we see submitted for acquisition projects. And in that project scope, there's no need to include any type of future construction projects, again, because your focus for your land and water project is only going to be for that acquisition. Now for development projects, the environmental review must include analysis sufficient for the construction of the land and water project scope elements. If CEQA is based off of a general or master plan rather than a site-specific analysis, should the application be recommended for funding, National Park Service will require additional site-specific analysis to satisfy NEPA. So keep that in mind. Applicants will file the appropriate CEQA documents with the state clearinghouse, and that's through the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And if you see here on your page, we have a link for you under number 3 in order to upload your CEQA documents into the state clearinghouse's database. Applicants will also provide a CEQA compliance certification form, which is actually on the next page in the application guide. And what that does is it's a certification form. The applicant will be certifying to our office that they in fact did complete sufficient CEQA for the proposed project scope. Along with that certification the certification form will be your proof of filing those CEQA documents with the state clearinghouse, as I just mentioned, and the final notice of exemption or notice of determination filed and stamped by your county clerk's office. If the project required an initial study and a subsequent negative declaration or mitigated negative dec or an EIR, please upload all of those documents for us. And that will be a complete CEQA package for our review. So if your project required those levels of analysis, please make sure that you send every applicable CEQA document that you prepared to us under checklist item number 7. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and answer a question really quick, 'cause I saw come up in the chat. If CEQA has been completed in the past couple of years, is that acceptable? As long as it's still the valid CEQA document that will allow your agency to proceed with the land and water project scope, then yes, that's part of that CEQA certification, that you're letting us know that it's still, in fact, the valid document that will allow you to proceed with your project. So thanks for the question, Dee. All right, now we're going to move on to checklist item number 8 on page 38. This is the project location map. All that we ask is that applicants upload a map showing highway and street access to the project site. So it's that simple. You can just use one of the mapping tools online and upload that map that shows how to get to your project site. Checklist item number 9 is photos of the project site. We're still on page 38. Applicants will upload up to 10 high-quality photos of the project site and its surrounding area. Please include information on the pictures in the file name. For example, files could be named site photo from the corner of X and Y streets. And this just helps orient the reviewer while they're looking at your project application file. Now, we've already discussed the item at the bottom of this page, checklist item number 10, the Community Fact Finder report, and the Park Access Tool report. As a reminder, please make sure to upload both of these reports in submittable for checklist item number 10. And if you have any questions, please keep using that chat feature, and I will now turn it over to Adela. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Page 39 and the top of page 40 cover general information about acquisition projects. Acquisitions can be by fee simple title or permanent easement. Please pay attention to the requirements regarding special uses of acquired property, such as timber management, grazing, and conservation or preservation of natural resources. These must be secondary uses. Recreation must be named as a primary use. Agricultural use is not allowed. Rights held by other parties must be identified in the application during the post-selection federal requirements process. There are several ineligible acquisition project examples included at the bottom of this page. For example, facilities that will not be used to support outdoor recreation, such as museums or hotels, are not eligible as part of the acquisition property. Starting on page 40, we have some acquisition-only checklist items. At the top of this page is checklist item number 11, Public Use Plan. Applicants with acquisition projects will, if the parcel includes indoor structures, describe each structure and the planned use for those structures. Explain if the buildings or structures will be demolished to create a park or open space, and if not, describe the proposed use for them. Note that LWCF funding may only be used to acquire a structure if it will be used to support or is necessary to achieve the outdoor recreation goal for the site. For instance, a residence that will be turned into a visitor center can be included in the value of the parcel. If the structure will be demolished, the appraised value of the structure needs to be excluded from the grant. Consultation with OGALs regarding the eligibility of structures for acquisition is highly encouraged prior to application submission. Explain if the acquisition parcel will require development to make the parcel usable by the public. If development is not necessary, also provide an explanation. If development is necessary, provide responses to question 3A through D. An acquisition must result in a new outdoor recreational opportunity for the public use in perpetuity. Only a proposal that creates a fully usable recreational opportunity that is open to the public immediately upon close of escrow or within 3 years after the completion of the acquisition will be eligible. Now let's review checklist item number 12, purchase agreement or other document showing agreed price, also on page 41. This item is also required for acquisitions only. For this checklist item, provide a document showing the landowner, that is, the seller, is willing to sell the property to the applicant not to exceed the appraised fair market value price. The letter of intent can include a provision for the agreement to be null and void if the project does not receive funding. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here is Christine.
Thanks so much, Adela. Okay, we are going to turn to page 42. And the following checklist items on this page are for development projects only. So there at the top of the page is checklist item number 13. That is land tenure requirement. For development projects, the project land must be owned by the applicant at the time of application. Provide the deed or other documents showing that the applicant owns the land. The next checklist item, number 14, is the concept level site plan. Provide a drawing showing where the recreation features and major support amenities listed in the project summary will be located in the park. If there are existing features in the park already, include those on the site plan, but please differentiate in the legend which elements are new and proposed through this LWCF project and which are existing. We recommend using different colors or shading or symbols to differentiate new from existing features. If the project scope includes eligible buildings such as a restroom or visitor center, note the function and the building's approximate total square footage. Indicate or describe where and how the public will access the park and where parking is currently located or will be located. This concludes the requirements for the applications due on June 1st. We do want to bring attention to the next few pages, however, in the guide. Please use that chat feature for any questions. I will now turn it over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Christine. All right, so let's dive into these post-election federal requirements. And this is beginning on page 43. So these application items will only be completed by applicants OGAL selects to move forward in the application process. However, we do believe it's helpful for all applicants to be aware of what the next steps would be in the federal application process if selected. So first off, we've got Section 106, the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and this is a process that determines whether there will be any effect on historic properties caused by the proposed project. Completing the Section 106 process can be a 6 month to 1 year or longer process, especially for development projects involving ground disturbances or historical sites. It can also be costly, and applicants are encouraged to include the cost of completing Section 106 as a pre-award planning cost in the budget narrative, as I mentioned earlier. So Section 106 is required before the grantee may proceed with the acquisition or development of land using land and water funds and match. And I know we've said that earlier too, but we do want to make sure that that is clear. For more information on the Section 106 process, you can visit the Land and Water Application Process webpage. And so now we're on to the next page, and right there in the middle of the page is the application and revision form. So this includes information on the project, other rights and interests within the property, and the environmental work completed, including the NEPA pathway recommendation to NPS. If you're interested in reviewing the form in advance, please email me after the workshop and I'd be happy to send it over to you. As a reminder, while a more general study may be sufficient for CEQA, it is not sufficient for NEPA. NEPA does require site-specific environmental review, and we'll happy to work with applicants on those next steps if selected. In addition, project sites that include waterways and or wetlands will likely need to consult with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And if they're federally listed species or critical habitat, applicants will likely need to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We recommend applicants begin informal consultation as soon as possible to determine upfront whether a permit or additional consultation will be needed. National Park Service will not approve a project until the required federal permits are in hand, and this process can take a year or more to complete. So we just want to make sure everybody is aware that that could be coming if selected and those items are on the project site. All right, now I'll hand it over to Nikki, and please use the chat feature for any questions.
Thank you so much, Megan. So we're going to continue with these post-selection federal requirements. We're going to talk about the Land and Water Conservation Fund boundary map, as well as the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, or UASFLA. Prior to obligation, applicants must provide the LWCF boundary map, a prepared map that shows the entire park boundary, acres to be protected for outdoor recreation use only, any other rights and interests, and other information about the park. This map establishes the boundary of land to be protected in perpetuity. A detailed description of what is required, as well as a sample map, is available on the post-selection federal requirements webpage. For acquisition projects, the property value used cannot be higher than fair market value. For each parcel to be acquired, LWCF acquisitions will need either an appraisal that meets those UASFLA or Yellow Book standards, and an independent appraiser's review certifying that it does meet those standards. Or applicants can get a waiver when the estimated property value is less than $10,000. Now, those UASFLA appraisals and that third-party review certification will be required prior to submitting a reimbursement request. The final pages in the guide, pages 51 through 56, cover all the defined terms in small caps found throughout the guide. So please use that chat feature if you have any questions about what I've discussed. And I'm going to pass it over to Natalie.
Thank you, Nikki. Oh, Victor would like to chime in. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I mean, this is an example. So Mike Estes just provided a really good question, and it's an example of how your questions help our presentation. Natalie and Megan, I'm going to need some help on this one, but let me give it a shot. So the question is, I remember from earlier example, Mike is envisioning there's a larger total project of roughly $21 million. And I have like a two-part answer to the scenario. Let's say that the larger total project is $21 million. You know, you can request up to $6 million through this program. To propose that larger total project of 21 million, there would need to be $15 million of committed match funds at the time of application, plus your $6 million land and water grant request to get to your $21 million total project. Okay. Now, if those match funds are not secured and at the time of application, what I would recommend is looking at, can a phase be proposed that would be covered by the land and water grant request plus the funds that you know are committed / secured for the project. And so let's just use an example of a skate park. If this skate park is, let's just say, $5 million, you can request up to 2.5 million as long as you have the other 2.5 million 50% match to cover that $5 million skate park. And here's the key, and that skate park can be built separate from having to fundraise on your larger project. So a phase is allowable and recommended to downscope, to basically scale your project down to what can be completed with the land and water grant request plus the committed match funds that you have ready to go. Okay, so that's one part of my answer. The second part of the answer is about community centers. Okay, and again, the purpose of this program is for outdoor recreation. National Park Service will not approve a quote unquote community center, but Natalie and Megan, correct me on this, is it still allowable to propose a quote unquote visitor center? And can you please explain the difference, or are we trying to, do we want to discourage visitor centers, even though they may be eligible?
Yeah, so I'll chime in, and Megan, please feel free to chime in as well. But visitor centers are eligible to be constructed with land and water funding if the project would like to include one. So that's your typical visitor center that only is going to be interpreting for that park only. Some of the interesting things that we found out is they can be tricky. Even any structure like a visitor center, it can't have a kitchen, for instance, in it, because that portion for sure will have to be excluded from your costs. So National Park Services is, we can work more with you if you have more questions on visitor centers, but things such as, we've seen simple cabins like yurts or very, very simple cabins being built in campgrounds, that it's eligible. But again, if there's going to be any kind of kitchenette, those types of elements have to be excluded and cannot be paid for by the grant. So again, visitor centers are eligible to be constructed in parks as long as they're only used for interpreting the surrounding areas of that, and of your park, not interpreting your region or all the parks within your jurisdiction. Construction of recreation centers or teen centers, community centers, those are not allowable costs to be constructed with land and water conservation fund. It doesn't mean that you can't later on request approval to construct an indoor structure in your park that is supposed to be for outdoor recreational purposes, but there's a process that you'll need to go through with our office, and we'll need to approve it through National Park Service ahead of time. So if you're planning to build a recreation center, community center, etc., within your park, you know, we'll need to work with you very early in that process of planning. But Megan, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think that covers it. It's got to support the outdoor recreation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Great answer. Thank you very much, Natalie. And I do want to get into what you just touched on, Natalie, about future community center projects or other indoor infrastructure that's not like a visitor center or a park. And the process, I mean, sorry, like a restroom building, the process it goes through. So as Natalie mentioned, the goal of Land and Water is to preserve the outdoor recreation space in perpetuity. So if there's a new proposed indoor facility after National Park Service has approved the park boundary, you would have to report it to our office, and then we'll provide guidance on the next steps and if National Park Service does or does not have to be involved. Additions that are not for purpose of improving the park for outdoor recreation, and are definitely not for park purposes. And examples are like a fire station or a commercial restaurant within the park boundary, or like a hotel. Those are what are called conversions. And so there's a process to convert park space into non-outdoor recreation purpose. And that essentially requires replacement property, which has to go through a process. So again, if it's a community center within a large park, it goes through a process. Typically, we get that approved with National Park Service. As long as we can justify that, it will attract more visitors for outdoor recreation use and really enhance the overall park experience. It will not affect the view shed of the park, etc. But if there will be a conversion to non-park purposes, like a fire station, hotel, restaurant, that does have to go through a process with National Park Service to identify replacement land. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Victor. Well, this concludes the review of our application guide. And at this time, we'd like to review the timeline once more before we close. Please remember that application deadline is before 5 p.m. on June 1st, 2023. We strongly encourage applicants to begin entering their project applications in sooner than later. The portal is live and open right now, so you're welcome to check that out after we end the workshop. After the deadline, OGAL staff may work with applicants individually on any incomplete checklist items or any clarifications that are needed, other than that project selection criteria that we went over earlier. That is set in as soon as you click that submit button. Applications that are selected to move forward to National Park Service will receive an additional training on the post-selection federal requirements in early 2024, with the hope to forward projects to National Park Service around summertime of 2024. Again, we will forward these projects on a first-come, first-served basis. We have an excellent team, as I mentioned earlier, that will walk applicants through those post-selection requirements and provide all the guidance that you need in order to move as quickly as possible through that portion of this process. After that, we send them over to National Park Service for their review. And with this timeline, we expect project start dates to start beginning around winter of 2024. Again, that allows for applicants about 6 to 12 months to go through that post-selection process. Please remember to reach out to your competitive review project officer with any questions, and we also will post this timeline on our Land and Water website for future reference as well. As we close out, I do want to briefly mention a few upcoming grant opportunities. The next application due date for the Habitat Conservation Fund and the Recreational Trails Program will be June 15th of this year, so 2023. More details will be sent out from our office very soon, but in the meantime, you can start visiting those program web pages. We do have the application guides already up, and the online application portals are live. So you can start beginning your applications for those programs right now. But again, our office will be sending out an email blast soon with additional details and as well as a schedule for application workshops. And for Habitat Conservation Fund, we're going to do it a little bit differently. And there's some more information that will be forthcoming on the question and answer session we're going to have for the Habitat Conservation Fund. So stay tuned. We also have another round of outdoor equity program that we are planning to announce soon. We hope to have a cycle for that outdoor equity program later on this fall. And more details to come on that program as well. Another grant program I want to mention is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. We call it in short, ORLIP. This is also a federal program run by the National Park Service that we get to help administer. And the funds for ORLIP are for the creation of new parks or substantial transformative renovations to parks in economically disadvantaged cities or towns of at least 30,000 people. And Sam's currently circling on the screen. You can find the link for the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program at the bottom of our Land and Water Conservation Fund program. And the reason for that is because they're both National Park Service funded programs and they are very similar. However, again, as I just mentioned, the ORLIP program has the emphasis on being in economically disadvantaged cities or towns. And in order to be eligible to apply for ORLIP, your city or town has to have at least 30,000 people. Eligible applicants are the same as Land and Water. So cities, counties, state agencies, with a broader eligibility there for all state agencies. Federally recognized Native American tribes, and park and recreation districts. Also JPAs as well, if all members are eligible under the Land and Water Conservation Fund. National Park Service has not yet released a notice of funding opportunity, which we call NOFO, announcing a future round. However, I just want to bring it up and let everyone get you familiar about this program. As typically in the past, National Park Service announces this program in the spring or summertime with a relatively short turnaround time for applications to be submitted. So we encourage you to, in the meantime, visit this ORLIP website, become familiar with it, reach out to us with any questions that you have on the program. And with that, I would like to just welcome you to put final questions in the chat. We are also going to take some time at the end of the portion for any remaining questions, and we can unmute you and you can ask your questions verbally. But with that, I'd like to hand it over to Cedric, and he's going to close out our session. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. First of all, again, thank you all for joining us today. We hope that this workshop is helpful to you on projects that you have in mind, and hopefully inspired you to think of projects that may be new to you. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is really the federal government's only program that really looks at park infrastructure for local governments and getting and building parks close to folks. So what we want to do is, I think from the presentation you've seen, what we really want to do is help you put your best foot forward, making decisions difficult. Please don't let this be the last time that you talk to us. When we said that this is the first time, but it is definitely not the last time. You have the contacts that we shared with you. Please pick up the phone or send an email and contact us with any questions you might have. We have, as Natalie mentioned, the ORLIP program. I just want to reemphasize that. Typically, that program becomes open in late spring, so and it is a very short time frame, but it's an excellent opportunity also to compete for projects on the national level. In the last year, I believe the amount was $10 million that you could apply for. So we really want to make sure that you're aware of all of the things that are potentially available to you. We want to be a partner in your effort to serve the people of California. We really believe that without a doubt, California is the place where we can have a system of park and recreation facilities unsurpassed anywhere in the country. We have the opportunity to make a statement to not only the Congress and the administration with this particular program. As you know, California has committed itself to access for all people, to access to the natural world. So there is a definite interest on all our parts to want to make sure that that happens. On that note, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for the questions that you have. Please stick around with us and we can answer any additional questions that you may have. But again, everyone, please have a safe day, a safe week, and we look forward to hearing from you in the near future with your plans. Thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to the team.
Great, thank you, Cedric. So we will hang out. I mean, we finished about 10 minutes early, so we will stay here and we can have a discussion. You can feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself, and we can answer your question through the mic, or you can continue using the chat. But we'll stay here until the questions are exhausted. So go ahead, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you.
We just received a question from Susan. Yes, we are going to post the webinar recording on our Land and Water Conservation Fund website, so you can go back in the future and reference it as needed. And of course, if there's any questions that pop up that you think of, please reach out to your competitive review project officer. We'll be happy to help. Yes, we did have another question too at the end here from Nicole about the population. So when I was referring to the population threshold, that was for ORLIP only. Land and Water Conservation Fund does not have a threshold for population, in order to be eligible. The ORLIP is very specific on being in an economically disadvantaged community, and they have that population threshold for really, the urbanized area, or at least a city or town that has over 30,000 people. So not the case for Land and Water Conservation Fund, though. Anything else in the chat that we would want to bring up out loud, Victor?
Thanks, Natalie. So, as Cedric and you mentioned, we do have other upcoming funding available, and so I posted a link to all the programs in our contacts at 11:49 a.m. in the chat feature. So you have all the links there.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions?
I see Michael has his hand up. Feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Michael, if you happen to be on the phone, the way to unmute yourself would be to press *6. There's going to be a slight pause in the connection, but if you're trying to speak right now, we can't hear you. Maybe you're on the phone, and just go ahead and hit *6. Oh, you're not on the phone.
I do see a question from him in the chat. In general, how do your programs address tribes that do not have federal recognition? So we can go ahead and speak to that. The SHPO typically wants to see consultation with all tribes that are provided on the NAHC list, even if they don't have federal recognition. It's not required through the federal funding, but in order to go through our California SHPO office, typically we do want to see that those tribes were contacted if they're included on that list. Natalie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that was well said. Michael, let us know if that answers your question, or if you're talking about eligibility for the program. I'm not sure if that's what your question is either. This program, it's in the Land and Water Manual. It lists the eligible applicants for this program. And it definitely is inclusive of federally recognized tribes. So let us know if you have additional questions on that. I think that we also, let's see, Christy had a question about ORLIP. If you're a county and you're applying for ORLIP, you need to select a location within your county. So either a town, most likely it'd be a town that you would still have jurisdiction over, that has a population of over 30,000. So it's not your county as a whole. They're looking for that specific. If you type in the address of the park site, your whatever that address is, it needs to have at least 30,000 people within that town. Let us know if you have any other questions on that. Thanks for your comment, Michael. Yeah, you can reach out to us and we can definitely discuss your comment and question in more detail later on. Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead and raise your hand or put your question in the chat. We will definitely hang out until at least 12 o'clock, but if questions keep coming in, our team is definitely willing to stay past noon to keep answering your questions.
Okay, so we have a question from Jeff. So if you are, thank you, Jeff. So if you are applying for an existing park and either it received land and water funding in the past, or you're not sure if it received land and water funding in the past, and you want to check if the entire park is already under land and water conservation fund protection, which is a key for criteria number 3 on page 28. I think the easiest thing to tell you is just send that question to your competitive review project officer. We'll look in our grant management system. We also can work with our colleagues in our grant administration team to go over the 6F3 boundary map and get a copy to you. So that's definitely a service we can provide. You don't have to do legwork. We can assist you with that. Okay. So just all you need to do is just send an email description of your project site, identify the park, a link maybe to the park would be great. And then we can go ahead and research in our grant database to look at the history. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, any other questions? Okay, as you know, our team has mentioned, today's not the end of application assistance. We'll be here to help you all the way until the June application deadline. So don't be shy. Our team loves providing assistance, and so just reach out to your project officer and we'll help you. We'll keep this meeting open for 2 more minutes. If there's no questions by 12:02, we will close the meeting. Okay, thank you so much, and best wishes with your application. Okay, last call for questions. Down to the final minute. We'll close at 12:02 unless there's one more question. Thank you. Okay, great. This workshop is now closed. Team, if you could stop recording.